Okay, so welcome to the next lecture on truth. We've looked in the last couple of lectures on various different kinds of truth. So we looked at universal compared to relative truth. The Queen of the United Kingdom was crowned in 1953. This is a universal truth. It is true for me, it is true for you, it is true for everyone. I am the Queen is a relative truth. It is not true for me. It's almost certainly not true for you, unless we have someone on this call who's not registered as part of the course. We had objective versus subjective truth. Objective truth is the kind of truth that we have gone through a process of being able to agree on, a public, critical, reflective process. So climate change is happening is objectively true for most knowledge communities. A subjective truth is one that has not, for whatever reason, either has not or cannot go through this collective critical process. So the many worlds hypothesis, a wonderful way to understand quantum mechanics, is a subjective truth and happens to be untrue for me. We then had in the last video noumenology compared to phenomenology. So noumenology, a noumenological truth, is what the universe is actually doing. And science is very bad at getting a handle on noumenological truth. Phenomenological truth, on the other hand, is what it appears is happening to our senses. And science is reasonably good at getting a handle on that kind of thing. Okay, now in today's lecture, we're going to look at another pair of ideas, namely factual and relational truth. So to start with factual truth, definitions from a logician: a statement is a sentence that is either true or false. Seems obvious enough. What other kind of thing could you have? But let's look into it. Okay, so consider, for example, squares have four sides is a statement. It is a true statement. It is objectively true. Everyone can agree on it. It is universally true. All squares have four sides. My name is David is not universally true. It's true for people who are called David, and it's untrue for everyone else. But it's still, for each person, either true or it's false. Triangles have four sides. This is a statement. It's untrue. It's false. It's universally false. There are no triangles anywhere in the universe at any point, past, present, or future, that will have four sides. This is a statement because it's either true or false. Notably, this one is false. Okay, so what else could there be? David? David, are you true? No, right. Okay, so I cannot say David is true. I can say David tells me the truth, which is to say David makes statements, and those statements are true. But David himself is not true. He can't be. Stand up. Careful. Okay, sit down again. Okay. So here we go. Right, stand up. It's not true. It cannot be true. It is not true that stand up. It is true that squares have four sides. It is false that triangles have four sides. It is not true that stand up any more than it is false that David, right? These are not statements because they do not possess the property of being either true or false. So much so obvious. Okay. Now let's look at religious truth. Are religious truths always factual? Factual truths are ones that refer to statements. Statements are able to be factually true. Now let's look, taking Christian religion, for example, let's look at what the Apostle Paul wrote to the church in Galatia. He said, "You are running a good race. Who cut in on you to keep you from obeying the truth?" Now, an instruction like stand up is not true. It cannot be true. You can obey it. You can obey it by standing up, and you cannot obey it by refusing to stand up. it requires from you a response, but it cannot be true. On the other hand, squares have 4 sides does not require from you a response. You cannot obey squares have 4 sides. And you say, hi, you should squares have 4 sides. It doesn't make sense. I can't say, who cut in on you? Who prevented you from obeying factually accurate statements? Because you cannot obey factually accurate statements. You cannot obey squares have 4 sides. They do or they don't, and your actions have nothing to do with that, right? You cannot obey my name is David. My name is David is a factual sentence. It is a statement which happens for me to be untrue, but I can't obey my name is David. On the other hand, I can obey David. But David is not capable of being true in a factual sense. Now, we therefore have an option. Either the Apostle Paul wrote something which any logician can tell him is nonsense because you cannot obey the truth, or the Apostle Paul was writing something where he wasn't talking about factual truth. He was talking about something else. Let's go and see. By looking through the Bible, you can get a handle on the kinds of things that the Bible means when it talks about truth. So, for example, truth is the opposite of evil. In John, the Gospel of John, he says, everyone who does evil hates the light, but whoever lives by the truth comes into the light. So we have this pairing here. On the one hand, we have living by the truth. On the other hand, we have doing evil. Now, again, living by the truth, obeying the truth. I can't live by squares have 4 sides, right? And there is nothing morally good or bad about squares having 4 sides. It's simply the way the universe is. There is nothing evil in a factual truth. In the grand is-ought dichotomy, it simply is the case that squares have 4 sides. That is neither good nor bad. I cannot live by squares have 4 sides, and I cannot say that those who have squares with 4 sides are the opposite of those who do evil. This doesn't make sense in a factual sense, which either means that John, like Paul, was writing nonsense, or it means that he wasn't talking about factual truth. Again, so in Corinthians, Paul did the same thing. He said, love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. Here we have the truth as the opposite of evil. Okay. We then have truth as having a moral component. It comes out again and again. So we say, these are the things that you're supposed to do. Speak the truth to each other and render sound judgment in your courts. Now, here, speaking the truth to each other, that could be a factual truth that is being spoken, unlike the previous ones where I can't obey a factual truth. This one, at least a factual truth would make sense, but it's not particularly talking about factual truth, or not factual truth in general. If my wife says, shut the fridge door, you're letting all the cold out, and I say, I think you'll find actually I'm letting the heat in because cold is a quasi-concept, then my wife might reasonably slap me, and I cannot turn around and say, but Zechariah instructs me that I must speak the truth to you, right? It is true, but this is not what Zechariah is concerned about. He's not talking about true, factually true statements like F equals MA. He's talking about ones that have a moral component, like in court, that was the man that stole my cow. So here, even when they talk about factual statements, they're talking about statements with a moral component that have to do with justice. You also have truth with a relational component. Now, squares have 4 sides. I don't relate to squares. I don't connect to squares in that kind of way. But John says, whoever speaks on their own does so to gain personal glory. But he who seeks the glory of the one who sent him is a man of truth. Now, if I send one of you with a message that says, when you go home tonight, please tell your grandparents that squares have 4 sides, you telling your grandparents a true statement is quite independent of whether or not you followed up with saying, and our lecturer, Dr. Brownut, is awesome and you should fully like go on what he says. You seeking my glory, or you trying to show that you're very clever and you know how many sides a square has, it doesn't matter whether you're trying to seek your own glory or whether you're trying to seek my glory as the one who sent you. Squares still have four sides. But John here is saying, no, this kind of truth that he cares about is connected to the relationship you have to the person who sent you. Something odd going on here. Now, as with so much in Christianity, a key to these knotty, thorny, confusing concepts comes in the person of Jesus. Now, Jesus answered, I am the truth. Now, Jesus was a terrible logician, we can be clear, because Jesus cannot be true, not in a factual sense, right? It is true that Jesus is not a meaningful statement. And if Jesus is not a statement, he can't be true or false. He just doesn't have that property. It's a category mistake. So either Jesus was talking nonsense or Jesus was talking about a different kind of truth to factual truth. Now, if we look further on in John, actually further back in John, okay, then you will know the truth, says John, and the truth will set you free. What truth is he talking about here? Is he saying if you learn more facts, if you learn more information, if you read these books, if you can recite in an exam all of these things, these facts that I have told you that are true, then you will be free? No, this is not what John is saying, because that's not the way John deals with truth, because he doesn't talk about factual truths. He says, 4 verses later, he says, if the Son sets you free, if Jesus Christ sets you free, then you'll be free indeed. The truth that sets you free in John's gospel is not the truth of facts, but the truth of the person who is Jesus Christ, who says, I am the truth. So again, this is not factual truth that John is talking about. This is something else. Now, given that, let's go back to Galatians. This is where we started. Who cut in on you and kept you from obeying the truth? Now, option 1 when we started was to say that the Apostle Paul was a terrible logician and speaking nonsense. And option 2 was to say he was thinking something else. Well, let's look at Galatians in context. Okay, it is for freedom that Christ has set us free. If you let yourselves be circumcised, Christ will be of no value to you. What is Paul talking about? He's talking about Jesus. You who are trying to be justified by the law have been alienated from Christ. For in Christ Jesus, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision has any value. Who cut in on you and kept you from obeying the truth? So, if we walk into this religious discussion that Paul is having and say, truth has to do always and only with facts and statements, because statements are things that have the property of being factually true or factually false, then you miss the entire concept that Paul is trying to get across. So in the last couple of weeks, we've been discussing truth, and all of the truths we've been discussing, objective, subjective, universal, relative, nomenological, phenomenological, these are all factual truths. And so in this talk, I want to highlight the fact that facts do not exhaust the notion of truth. And when people talk about truths which are not factual truths, that is not meaning they are crazy. It means, or it could mean, that there are other kinds of truth to which we can pay attention. Okay, we can now ask the question, how should we interact with truth? Now, even to pose the question might not have occurred to us if we were thinking simply about factual truths, because a square has 4 sides. How do I interact with that? I don't. It just sits there as this truth on its own. But with relational truths, it's now a question that we might be prompted to ask. And having asked the question, we can actually answer it for factual truths as well. So here we go. So what's the difference between responding factually and responding to truths relationally? So here we go. Now, Martin Buber, who wrote one of the texts in the extra recommended text at the bottom on I and Thou, He came up with this contrast between I, it responses and I, you, or I, thou responses. So he said, with facts, we have the thing with which we are interacting is an object which is out there, which is separate from us, which is distinct from us, which doesn't involve us or concern us fundamentally. My life is not changed by squares have four sides. It is there. On the other hand, I-you interactions are not the engagement of a person with an object, but of a person with a person with a thing which is personal, with a subject. And this changes the way we interact with them. We view facts as being distinct from us, being out there, being apart from us, whereas relational engagement with truth has us connected to it. I can learn that a square has four sides. I can go into an exam and I can write down the answers and get all my maths questions correct, and I can walk out of that exam and be utterly unchanged. And the fact that it hasn't changed my life doesn't mean I haven't understood that squares have four sides. It simply means that I can understand it entirely and fully in its factual nature, and that doesn't change me. Whereas with a relational truth, if I say, I have understood that Jesus loves me, I have understood Jesus, I have grasped him, and I can walk away from that unchanged, then Christians at least would say, if you claim to have understood it and you can walk away from it unchanged, you have not understood it. It is connected to you in an intimate, deep, important, significant way. So factual truths we engage with dispassionately, objectively. We deliberately set ourselves apart from them. We say, okay, I look at what's in the lab, but to get this objective view, I must not let it concern me. On the other hand, relational truths we engage with passionately. If you come across the love of your life and say, I've met Katie, isn't she wonderful, right? To engage with this relational truth and to say, I'm not going to be passionate about it. I must, in order to engage with this relationship, I have to be dispassionate and calm and quiet and not let my emotions run away from me, is to have missed the very point of the relationship. We don't engage with this relational thing dispassionately. We need to engage with it passionately. We deal in this I-it relationship, treating the other as an object, as a thing. Buber tells us this actually works back on us. This, by stripping the humanity out of one end of the interaction, we strip the humanity out of the whole interaction. This dehumanizes us. Treating the other as a thing, as an it, forms me into half of an I-it pairing, and that dehumanizes me. Whereas relationally, treating the other as a person, as a being to whom I relate on a personal level, passionately, connectedly, relationally, makes me not half of an I-it pairing, and therefore in an inhumane interaction, but half of an I-you pairing, and therefore part of a humane interaction. Engaging with this truth actually elevates my humanity. And so we look at these, and clearly, if one approaches religion in a factual sense, if you say the truth that is to be known in religion and the only truth that is to be known in religion is a factual truth, I must go out and I must carefully analyze whether it is factually true that Christ was tried under Pontius Pilate, and on the third day he rose to life. I must discover whether it is factually true that he was born of the Virgin Mary, or whether it was factually true that he lived in Galilee. These are facts, and religion does indeed deal with facts. But to think that this is the core, or worse still, only concern of religion is to utterly miss what religion often talks about when it talks about truth. Because to be concerned for only those, and to say, in order to best engage with understanding the truth of whether Jesus lived in Galilee. Jesus lived in Galilee is a statement. This is a factual thing capable of being true or false. So to engage with that, I must set myself apart from it. I must not get my emotions involved. I must be distinct and dispassionate and inhumane. I must suppress my own humanity, because that is the way to engage with the truth of religion, is to misunderstand the kind of truth that religion particularly deals with, particularly cares about. Now, that much being said, I don't want to break into two-columnism here, two-listism, right? It looks on the face of it like I'm now saying, aha, we have factual statements here, and this is what science does, and we have relational statements here, and this is what religion does. So, Dr. Brown, you've just gone back into two-listism. We knew we'd get you eventually. But no, here's what I say. I'll say there exist these two kinds of truth. And just as science makes objective claims and subjective claims, can and does make both kinds of claims, and just as religion makes subjective claims and objective claims, can and does make these. But just as, for example, if we'd have focused on the objectivity of science, we might not have realized the fullness of the picture, and realizing subjective things over here, we can now turn back and say, okay, well, how does science engage with that? Oh, look, subjectivity was mixed into science all along. Can we do the same now with factuality and relationality? And I'm going to say, yes, we can. While it was consideration of religious texts that made us aware of relational truth as being significantly distinct from factual truth, that does not mean to say that it is the pure remit of religion. Science does it too. So let's have a look. And for the example, I'm going to take conservation science. Okay. Factual statements do not, and in many senses cannot, require a response. If I say squares have four sides, I'm not asking anything of you. I'm not requiring you to do anything, to change anything. Squares simply have four sides. That's the way the world is. You don't need to respond to that. If I say to you, get up, this is not a factual statement. And yet it absolutely requires a response. So factual statements do not require responses. Relational statements, relational truths, often do require a response. Now, conservation science requires a response. Let's look at a scientific statement. If you continue to cut down bamboo forests at the current rate, you will run out of pandas within 10 years. Now, this is a factual statement. It has the property of either being true or false. We might not know whether it's true or false. It's one or the other, not sure which, and there are ways to find it out with varying degrees of certainty. Now, as good scientists, what we can do is we can make a prediction. This is a prediction. We can then test this prediction. What we do is we keep on cutting down bamboo forests at the current rate. We wait 10 years and we see if we have any pandas left. And if there are no pandas left, we say it was correct. And if there are some pandas left, we say it was incorrect. Right? This is a factual statement. This is prediction. This is hypothesis testing. This is good science. And this is terrible conservation. Right? This is terrible conservation. Conservation requires a response to this statement. But there is no response in this fact because it's just a fact. What we do is we say, therefore, you should stop cutting down bamboo forests. Right? The insertion of this second sentence gives us the response. This is conservation. But in a normal sense, this is bad science because you should stop cutting down bamboo forests is not testable. There is no test tube I can go and find that will show me an atom of should, an atom of ought to. There is no thing I can do with a hypothesis that says, where does my should come from? This thing which makes it good conservation, which makes it require a response, steps out from our normal realm of facticity. So we have options. Option one is we say conservation science is incoherent, right? Conservation requires a response. it goes beyond the realm of facts. Science lives in the realm of facts and cannot require a response. Therefore, conservation science is a contradiction in terms, that it cannot work. Throw it away. Stop doing it. Option 2 is to say conservation science is incoherent, but we should do it anyway. We understand that we can't do this. We understand that it makes no sense. We understand that it's utterly logically incoherent, and yet we're going to do it anyway. It's an option. If you suggest that to professors of conservation science, they start to look a little bit uncomfortable with that idea. I mean, they look very uncomfortable with the idea of abandoning it, but they look reasonably uncomfortable with the idea of doing it anyway, despite the fact that they know that it's utterly incoherent. Okay. Option 3 is to say the remit of conservation should be restricted so that it does not urge a response. Somehow conservation science is now just science. And option 4 is to say the remit of science should be expanded so that it does urge a response. So we say science, conservation science, can make the statement, if you keep cutting down trees, we will run out of pandas. Therefore, you should stop cutting down trees. Science is able to have a response, a personal response, one that involves passion, one that involves action, one that involves humanity, one that says, not, I am disconnected from this, let the pandas do what the pandas do, but one that says, I am connected to this. And in treating the panda not as a factual curiosity, but as a real subject with which I relate, then I elevate my own humanity, and this is an appropriate part of science. Now, different people will have different opinions as to which of these 4 things we should take. And many conservation scientists actually have never noticed that the problem exists because they don't do a whole lot of philosophy of science. And that's okay to an extent. But once you realize the problem is there, at least one of these responses, and I would argue a very good one of these responses, is to say that the remit of science can and should be expanded so that science is able, in its richest sense, to urge a response, that science does engage with relational truth. So, in summary, we now have multiple different kinds of truth, and they interact and overlap, just as we've seen that you can have universal subjective truths and relative objective truths, and so on and so forth. So when you engage with a discussion about truth, be aware that there is not some single monolithic truth, that all statements that are true in the same way, true of the same kind, true for the same reasons, true to be understood and engaged with in the same way. Truth is a wonderfully rich and multifaceted notion.